the happy hour. I don't know what we got to figure out what we want to officially call it. But Anwar and I are here. It is Thursday. We're 2 games before the start of the spring break. Oh my God, the spring game. My head. Anwar, I got the second shot yesterday, and my body aches and my brain isn't working. So we're gonna get through this quarterback discussion. But if I start drooling or if I pass out, know that I had the second shot, and the impact of that is clicking in. Look, we're here to talk Texas football. Geoff, Ketchum, Anwar, Richardson again of orangebloods.com. We are doing the live streaming on YouTube for the first time. So welcome if you are tuning in for the first time. We're going to talk some Texas quarterbacks. Hudson Card and Casey Thompson both speak to the media today for the first time in all of spring camp. Basically 48 hours away from the spring game. Anwar, you sat in on the calls. You were involved in the calls. I've seen your reaction on Slack. Give it to me here. Your 30,000 from the 30,000 feet from the ground kind of view of what it sounded like hearing from the 2 quarterbacks who were competing for the starting job this year.
You know, this should be overreaction Thursday because we do overreaction Monday, and that works out really well. But, you know, this here, Catch, I'm just going to be honest with you. It's going to sound like a little bit of an overreaction. Casey Thompson, to me, spoke like a starting quarterback, and Hudson Card spoke like a backup. It was just that glaring. If you get on Orange Bloods right now, Catch, and you look at the differences to the answers that each person said, or at least person responded to, you would get like, there's something going on here. Now, I get it, right? You're going to say it's interviews, right? It's just interviews. What does it matter how good or charismatic one person is versus how good or charismatic someone else is, right? I get all that, right, Catch? But I think there's something.
You?
No, because here's the thing. And this is where you're going to push back, but this is where I'm going to say the difference of everything is, Catch. It's this. If I cook, right? You probably cook a little bit. And no one says we do great, but you cook, right? And so if by chance you were asked to explain a couple of things, you give a couple of little answers, you would be able to do that. But here's the thing. If by chance that someone asked you for specifics on how the meal was being prepared, if you couldn't really give those answers, it would show that you weren't a professional within that field. And that's the thing that I saw. I saw one person who was very comfortable with the subject matter because he seemed to be an expert in his field. And then I saw someone else who just appeared to be a person that was going through the motions. But I refuse to just say, oh, well, maybe he's not a great interview. No, I've heard starting quarterbacks speak, and one guy sounded like one and another one didn't.
Yeah, I don't care. I mean, I look at Hudson Card. I'm listening to what you say, and with all due respect, Hudson Card has been on campus. This is his first time to ever really talk. Has he ever done an interview before with the Texas media?
I mean, has he done interviews throughout his life?
Has he ever done an interview before with the Texas media?
He's done interviews throughout his life. Tell me, don't give
Has
me
he
quarterback.
ever done an interview as a quarterback at the University of Texas with Texas football media? Yes or no?
No. Has he ever done an interview in his life, Catch?
Not in this setting.
It's on Zoom.
It's his first. I think in listening to the interviews, I thought Casey sounded confident, but I also know that Casey hasn't been outplaying Hudson Card. So I'm trying to balance the conversation of one guy sounds like the starting quarterback when he talks to people, more so than the other guy. But the guy that sounds like the starting quarterback, at least today, hasn't been performing day in and day out like he's the starting quarterback. So I just don't have a lot of reaction today to what it sounded like, because if we were having conversations throughout the spring where Casey Thompson had clearly been outperforming Hudson Card, and then you combine today's media sessions with it, I think it's painting a picture. But when one thing sounds one way And the other thing behind the scenes is looking a different way, at least in the sense that it does not look like on the field Casey Thompson is clearly better than Hudson Card. In fact, I'm somewhat interested by the fact that they let both guys talk to the media today instead of letting them talk after the spring game, because I would imagine they would both be players after Saturday if there's media availability with players from the game that both the media would certainly like to talk to. I don't completely dismiss it in the sense that I will make a mental note that, okay, the first time that they both guys speak to the media, one guy gave off an air of confidence and sounded like one thing while the other guy wasn't quite there yet. Okay. But like that's a duly noted. Like I will file that away. And if we get to a point where we're in August and it's still really close, then I think if in baseball the tie goes to the runner, I think in a situation where we get to August and one guy, if they're still close enough that the intangibles really kick in, then I think everything that you're saying may play a much bigger role. But today, I'm just not quite feeling the overreaction. But here's the thing, like it's a 50-50 zero-sum game on some level, right? So you may end up being right when it's all said and done. I just don't know that today will be the correlation that gets us there.
I just think the one thing that he said, and I say Casey Thompson that said was really telling to me this quarterback battle. There was a difference. There's a difference in response. Okay. One person talked about, and I'll say start with Casey. He talked about the leadership. And he said, look, one thing I want to be is more vocal. And look, you can ask anybody on the team and they can tell you about me as a leader. Pound your chest, Casey. What happened when Hudson Card talked about it? Yeah, I've got to learn how to become more vocal. And that's the thing that I've heard about Hudson Card that's been a knock on him, is that he hasn't been as vocal and he hasn't been a leader. And you know why you're not as vocal and why one person is? Because you're vocal when you have a command of the offense. When you feel confident in everything that you do, it's very easy to be vocal. It's very easy to stand up and get in the guy's face or yell certain things out. But when you're not as confident, it's harder to be that way. And I'm not quite sure, and I would have to push back on the notion that Hudson Card in 3 months looks so much better, or 4 months, than Casey Thompson does. A freshman who's been on campus, who had to learn one system, who's basically was a year under Sam in a really weird situation. Now all of a sudden it comes in, and 3 months later, not only does he have command of the playbook, but this guy's a freaking gunslinger. I'm not going to buy that. I'm going to buy a little bit more, Ketch, of the guy who's sat here for 3 years, who's had to sit and wait, who's had different coordinators, so he's actually been able to learn what to do and how to study. A guy that, again, he's talked about, he said, Ketch, from the moment that Steve Sarkisian was hired, he reached out to Chris Del Conte and he said, hey, I need that guy's number. And he immediately reached out to Sarkisian and started saying, hey, tell me more about this playbook. Tell me more about this offense. How can I grasp this? How can I learn this? And said from that moment, he has been bugging Steve Sarkisian to learn more and more about the playbook. And he said, hey, just on Wednesday, in fact, I was breaking down Alabama, Georgia, just to learn something. So yesterday, he was just going and he was saying, I got to learn more about it. I ain't heard that about Casey. We haven't heard about all the extra film work that Casey's been doing. Oh, we hear about, he looks good in practice, but we haven't heard about the little intangibles. And I asked him specifically, Ketch, hey, what are the little extra things that you were doing just to kind of, go, because that's what I heard one person say it. And he's like, well, film is important. I've been trying to dive into that, getting to know the system well, and it takes time. Just diving into that. just extra workout, extra throwing sessions with the receiver, just doing extra stuff because it plays a big part.
Couple of things. This time last year, if Sam Ehlinger and Casey Thompson had done interviews, Sam Ehlinger would have sounded like the guy that should start at quarterback. He would sound smoother and polished. And yet, I think you and I would both agree, no matter how either of them would have sounded in interviews a year ago, Casey Thompson needed to play more. And yet, there's no doubt in my mind that Sam would have won the interview game. And yet, I find myself caring about what happens on the football field a little bit more. I hear what you're saying, but when Casey Thompson shows up, what he's not saying is, I think I'm winning the battle with my play on the field. So for all of the things,
he has said that. He did say that. He said it today. You may not have seen it, but he did say that.
Okay. I think I've not heard a single person tell me that Casey Thompson is having a better spring than Hudson Card. Not one. And I just think you may end up being right. I'm just not of the frame of mind it would be different if I just recently hadn't been told Hudson Card has looked better than Casey Thompson. And that wasn't a one-day thing. That was in the last week. That doesn't include, to be fair, that doesn't include anything that would have happened today or Tuesday. But in the last week, Hudson Card has been described as the guy that's playing better. And he was better in the scrimmage. And when that was reported, I didn't have a single person push back and say, whoa, I saw what you reported. Just so you know, I was there. And I've had former players tell me, I think Hudson looked better than Casey Thompson. So just like I'm not going to completely overreact from that. Oh, it's a small snapshot in time. I think today is as well. I am fully willing to concede that Casey Thompson's profile at this point screams starting quarterback more than Hudson Card does. But his play on the field this spring is not screaming that. In fact, the one thing you hear about both guys right now is that they both need to cut back on mistakes. And as long as that's the verbiage being used, it's still a quarterback battle. And the thing where Casey Thompson has an edge that Hudson Card's got to figure out, because Hudson Card sounded like a guy who was basically a redshirt freshman, right? And Casey sounded like a guy that had been in the offense or been in the program. It's the difference between being a teenager and being a young man. And I thought today Casey Thompson sounded like a young man, and Hudson Card sounded like a teenager. I don't know how much of that will change by the time we get to the start of the football season. It is an advantage that Casey Thompson has. He's just not outperforming him on the field right now on any level that has me comfortable with saying definitely he's going to be the starter. I will continue to say, though, that if true separation on the field doesn't take place between either of them, like it may be that Hudson Card needs to have a bigger lead to be the starter than Casey does, right? Because Casey's has these attributes that Hudson kind of lacks at the moment. And so maybe if it's like, well, it's 55-45, Hudson grades out better and has had a slightly better camp, but in the intangibles department, Casey's 80-20. I don't know how Steve Sarkisian, I feel like Tom Herman, I feel like, we just don't know enough about this staff yet as to what they value. And I think Charlie Strong had a different value system when it came to his quarterbacks than Tom Herman did. And I just don't know Steve Sarkisian well enough yet to know what are the things that matter most. And it could be in a private conversation, he would say, look, if Hudson doesn't become a little bit alpha, right? How many times do we use that word with Sam? If he's not a little bit more of an alpha male at that position, that may set him back. But how much did all that alpha male shit with Sam? Like, what did it really mean? He never got better from his senior year to his sophomore year statistically. His sophomore, junior, and senior year, he was consistently just okay. And nobody's more of an alpha than Sam. So there's an interesting conversation to be had right now about talent and intangibles and how you add all of those pieces up together to come up with ultimately your answer for who takes the field first and maybe permanently once the season starts against Louisiana. My head's just not in a place yet where I have a great feel for how that goes, but I fully recognize the advantages that you're pointing to. And if this thing remains close over the course of the next 5 months, 4 months, then I think the things that you're talking about today end up being a lot more significant. But if we get to August and Hudson's just better, but Casey's winning the interview battles, I think they're going to go with Hudson Card.
So I just haven't heard anything so far that makes me think that Hudson Card is so far ahead just based off of.
Well, nobody's saying that. Nobody is saying that.
I mean, I've heard he's had good practices, right? But I haven't heard anything. If the most I've heard is even, but I haven't heard anything to that just screams that.
Have you heard that Casey Thompson is, from anybody that you trust, is significantly, because nobody said that about Hudson, but I sure as hell haven't heard that about Casey either.
No, I haven't heard someone say that Casey Thompson's blowing it away either. But I haven't heard that per se. But so I've heard just, each one good days, bad days, highs and lows, those type of things is what I've heard more consistently than anything else. And we'll have a good glimpse of it. I'm just, I'm still, it's one of those things for me. I don't know. It's hard for me to give. It's almost like, okay, here we go. I'll formulate the thoughts. It's like the backup is always more popular than the starter. And I feel like that's kind of what the Hudson Card lore is. It's like, oh my gosh, did you hear about this one thing?
Well, I think he's a 5-star prospect. That's the best pure quarterback prospect that Texas has signed probably since Vince Young.
That's true. Well, he played in the Alamo Bowl game as well.
He did.
Okay, so I mean, I hear what you're saying, but
I mean, once upon a time, Priest Holmes had an amazing bowl game where he scored 4 touchdowns, and then the next year he was on the bench behind Sean Mitchell and Ricky Williams. Like, Casey Thompson has a set of advantages that lift. There's a reason. Casey Thompson's advantages currently are the reason why he's going out first with the offense right now. He's the older guy. He's more experienced. He's had more success on the field, even if in a really small sample size. His small sample size is a lot more impressive than Hudson Card's smaller sample size at this point. All I care about is who's performing on the field right now. And neither guy has performed well enough, I think, to discernibly have an absolute lead in the battle, right? Like, I'm telling you that I've heard that Hudson Card has been better in a snapshot of practices over the course of a week, but I wouldn't come out and tell you, I wouldn't say, I have an opinion, but I wouldn't say factually that I believe, based on what I've told, that there's a guy that, I don't know if this was a 100-meter race. I don't know that there's a guy that's a couple of steps ahead of the other one. I think it's neck and neck. I think Casey Thompson has advantages that cannot be ignored. But in what world do we live in where the older guy is even-ish? Is that okay? Even-ish?
Sure. Even-ish, yes.
The older guy is even-ish with the younger guy. Typically, the old expression is, if the younger guy is even, the younger guy is leaving. And that doesn't always pan out that way. I mean, I've given a number of examples over the last couple of weeks and months where that was not the case. But typically speaking, I think it's problematic for Casey Thompson if he leaves the spring and his biggest advantage is the interview room and the intangibles of leadership. I want to see with my eyeballs, like apples to apples. And as we're having this conversation, I think now I want to see both of them against the first team defense. And we did this on Monday, and the conversation was like, maybe you put them in a situation where both guys can have success and both guys are able to have success in a little bit of a rigged game, right? Make sure that both guys are getting snaps against the scrubs and let them have a couple of show pony touchdown plays that makes them feel good. Now that you and I are having this conversation, screw it. I want to see them play 1 versus 1, and I want to see what both of these guys do against a first-team defense, not so that we can overreact on Saturday and say one guy is definitely best based on what happened on Saturday, just so that you and I have a little bit more of an expanded sample size to draw some conclusions on going into a summer, which we just haven't seen enough live stuff with our own eyes consistently. And I hate leaning on what other people tell me as the basis of an opinion. I find myself I have my opinion for what I think will happen, but I don't even know that I can put my foot into the water and tippy-toe it and say, I think this guy is leading the battle and give some sort of percentages, because it feels very messy. It feels like one guy's got all of these advantages. And if I just heard a little bit of Casey hadn't been much better, but he has been better. And I think if I had heard that even a little bit, combine that with all of the things that we're talking about, really from an intangible standpoint, leadership, vocalness, media interviews, you add with a little bit ahead with a major ahead in these other areas. And I think I'd put my foot into the water and say, Casey's leading this job and Hudson's going to have to be a lot better to take the job. I don't know. I just don't have this sense that either guy's playing at a level yet where anybody in the program is completely comfortable being that definitive.
The question will be then, now we got to start talking about intangibles, right? So in this battle, if everything's there, and one of the things that Steve Sarkisian talked about previously was he's looking for leadership, right? He wants a leader. Well, if the Casey Thompson is the guy that's calling you all the time, if Casey's the guy that's texting you all the time, if Casey's the guy that's putting in the extra film work all of the time, if Casey's the guy that we hear is organizing the workouts afterwards, and we hear Casey Thompson staying late, right? We hear about him staying late with Roshan and Bijan and receivers and working. Like, these are the little things that we keep hearing from a guy that wants the job, right? And look, I'm not saying Hudson Card doesn't want the job, but Casey views this thing as, this is my last shot. Like,
oh, no doubt. There's a sense of
urgency.
That is the thing I notice most today.
Yes.
Sense of urgency with Casey, even though he made a point to not sound desperate. You know what I mean? Like, there's this idea
it's 2:00 and the bar is closing in an hour, and Casey Thompson knows it.
But he didn't say, I'm bound. You know what I mean? There were some coded words that he could have used. He didn't say. He sounded very confident. Hudson Card sounded like a guy who deferred a little bit to Casey. And you know what it is? I just can't stop thinking about Sam. And for all of Sam's leadership, for all of the great interviews that he did, for all of the setting up practices, and in retrospect, I think they should have played the guy that didn't set up practices, that didn't do interviews, that wasn't being talked about as a leader, that didn't do any of those things. He needed to play last more, because at some point, as long as you and I are talking about these quarterbacks and the intangibles are the first things that come out of our mouth, Texas isn't going to be a championship program. When Texas went to the OU game last year, they had the quarterback that was better on paper. They had the quarterback that was easily a better interview guy. They had the quarterback that was a better leader. There was the guy that people would rally. And in the end, he lost to a guy that got benched in the game that has none of those things. I want to start hearing, and I'm somewhat putting Hudson Card on blast a little bit too. Like, I want both of those dudes to play better. And that you and I are having this conversation today where the intangibles are kind of the first thing that are being we're kind of talking about today screams a little bit of these guys aren't playing well enough behind the scenes that we're talking about their play first and foremost. And maybe this is a world because practices have been closed where that would be hard to do definitively. But, when you ask about both guys, it's like, oh, they're both having days, but they're both making mistakes still, and they both have to cut them back. It's not what I want to hear about these guys, because I'm viewing this through the prism of how does Texas get to a Big 12 championship game, and then with 60 minutes of football to be played, how do they win it? They don't win it with a quarterback who's getting by on his intangibles. And we know that because Texas has had a quarterback for the last 4 years that was A+ in intangibles. I mean, half the people on our message board have a I stand with Sam avatar. But what did that mean? Half the games last year, he played like a player that needed to sit down and watch his backup play. Now, that was never going to happen. Herman was never going to do that to Sam. But we agreed like before the Alamo Bowl that there were times last year, the Texas Tech game is a perfect example where the offense was just sputtering. They should have lost that game, if not for an epic comeback and all of the things that it took to make that happen. But there was a moment in that game where it was like, they really should try Casey. But he didn't have any of the things that today you think he has. It's because at the end of the day, I just want to have a conversation about these two's talent. And they both, I think, are extremely talented, but it hasn't taken foot. Have you heard once that Casey has taken his performance from the Alamo Bowl and built on it to the point where the guy that they saw in the Alamo Bowl, they're seeing every day in practice?
No.
Me either. And I'm not saying he has to be that every day, but I haven't heard that even every other day he's doing that. And it is the thing about Casey we talked about where, and to your point, I point to James Brown all the time. James Brown made John Makovich's entire career at Texas. He won him 3 championships, 2 of them outright, but he hated James Brown as a practice player. And it could be that Casey has that vibe where you put him in live action in games and he's just different in practice. But I just don't know that that's the gamble that Steve Sarkisian wants to make. Neither guy's consistent enough yet. That's the main thing that stands out to me. While I fully acknowledge everything that you've said today, like I don't disagree that Casey doesn't have an edge in the things that we're talking about. I just can't quantify how important that stuff is after listening to Tom Herman slobber all over Sam Ehlinger and these very issues for the last 3+ years. And it never really amounted to Sam being a consistently plus player on the field.
I think what has to happen, though, Ketch, when you start talking about who's going to be the guy, who's going to ultimately be the quarterback at Texas, that guy has to be able to go toe-to-toe with Spencer Rattler and Brock Purdy, right? At the end of the day, you need a guy who can stand up to those two, okay? Because those are the top dogs that are coming back in the Big 12. And we know that we know Spencer Rattler will only be better. We know Brock Purdy's got everybody that's coming back. And so, and I don't put Spencer Sanders from Oklahoma State really, in that competition or that name. I mean, he's competitive, but
Texas will go 8-4 if they get Spencer Sanders level of quarterback play this year.
Fair, right? So, and I'm looking and I'm just going through the list, like no one else, right? You really feel like, shit, like Texas got to worry about, I'm just, they're guys. So, but to get to those are the top 2 teams.
Yeah.
Like those are the teams you've got to be able to overthrow. So you got to have a person that can go toe to toe and not make mistakes against those teams and be able to, when Spencer's, when Rattler starts getting hot, because he may not have he may never have another game, Catch, like that one that he had against Texas. He may never have another game in this career where he gets benched in the middle of the game, gets a chance to come back, and then it ends up winning the game. So
good and bad, that happens though, right? I mean, Gerard Hurd never had another game like that Cal game. And it's why a level of, and we had heard about Gerard Hurd, right? Like, it wasn't like when Hurd had that performance going back that we had been hearing every day. Gerard Hurd looks badass. Like, he looks like he could set a school record for total offense. Just put him in the game. Instead, what we heard about Gerard Hurd, that it all the way leading really up to the start of that season was, we don't really know if we don't know what he is. Like, practice in and practice out, he's not consistently impressing. And so when he had that performance, my reaction at the time was a whole lot of, I don't know. Like, let's see it again. There's a little bit like both of these players are punished by 10 years of quarterback failing. So both of them, I can talk myself into everything that I've heard doesn't matter, because we've heard all of this stuff about each of these, about quarterbacks in the past. We heard buzz about Shane, and we heard buzz about Sam, and we heard Gerard Hurd had a little flash in the pan where people were excited, and there was the swoops era, and David Ash once upon a time. Like, there's just an entire decade. If we were having this, if Sam had another year of eligibility and Hudson Card wasn't here, and this conversation was about Sam and Casey, I'd be like, I don't care about all that stuff. I need to see Casey play. I saw Casey I know what Sam is. The weird thing about both of these two guys is we don't really know who they are yet. And so that reality makes it hard for us, I think, to be definitive. Whereas with Casey and Sam, I was definitely at various points of last season ready to try the devil I didn't know versus the devil I did. But I'm wishy-washy on that, right? I mean, look, at the end of the day, if there was a game today, Casey Thompson would start it. And the important thing about that note is if Casey gets the run out against Louisiana, if he takes off and plays well, what are we talking about? He'll be the starter all season long. And if he's not, or he can't consistently be better in practice by the time we get to August, I don't know. I don't know what you do if you're Steve Sarkisian. At that point, if Casey Thompson's got all these intangibles, but it's not showing up when they grade practice. Yeah, it's a weird one. I don't have, I guess all this conversation for me to say, I don't have a good answer right now.
Yeah.
But I feel you. I do. Like, I just don't know how much it means, because if we were doing this broadcast last year and this was a Casey versus Sam conversation piece, Sam would have all of the advantages over Casey that you think Casey has over Hudson. And then I agree with you. Like, you and I both agree to that. But in reality, would Texas have been better off last year with Casey Thompson being the quarterback all year long? I don't think they would have been worse.
Well, here's the thing, and this is what I always go back to. Two quarterbacks, same game. Look at what happened in one half, and look at what happened in the second half with the same personnel. Just so it begs the question. Same personnel. Again, Colorado game looked like it was going to be a dogfight. It looked like, oh man, here Texas is going to have one of those things, and they're going to have to pull it out in the fourth quarter. They're just, it's just going to be one of those games. And then Sam gets hurt, and Casey comes in, and it's the tale of two halves. And next thing you know, you're like, what? Where the hell's this guy been? He's been on the bench? And then you go. So for me, I saw that. And so for me, I've got to give Casey a little bit of benefit of the doubt that says that happened. And I can't discount that happened. If Casey. You
can't even a little 30 minutes of football. He had 10 pass attempts.
Why is it easier for me to believe what I saw with my own eyes than what we hear about, some practices where Hudson throws the ball like Aaron Rodgers?
Well, I don't think you should believe anything. right? Like
Mhm.
I just, there's nothing to, I can't force myself to believe anything right now other than I believe both guys are incredibly talented. I'm not poo-pooing Casey Thompson's talent. I'm even leaving the door open for all this practice stuff doesn't matter. Just put him in a game. And it could be every time the lights come on, you get a performance out of him that's always going to be better than practice. 30 minutes of sample size feels very Gerard Hurd-ish. And I look at Utah. When Casey Thompson comes into the game, they hadn't prepared for him at all. They hadn't prepared for his skill set. They hadn't prepared for what dynamics they would have had no idea. Colorado. Sorry, what did I say? Yeah, Utah. Okay.
Utah.
When they played Colorado, I've got Utah on the brain because they keep taking everybody in the transfer portal, and I was talking about them earlier. But one of the things that both of these quarterbacks will have to deal with, and it's always one of the problems of a young quarterback who's starting to get his first bit of sample size, is when teams get film on a guy. Right? If Casey starts the season, I don't know that Louisiana will have a good feel for how to approach Casey as you know what I mean? Like nobody's had success stopping him yet because we're really only talking about 30 minutes of football. Both of these guys at some point, whoever the starter is going to get 2 or 3 games into the schedule. Teams are going to have film. Teams are going to make adjustments. And how do those players adjust once teams figure them out a little bit? It was the bugaboo that got Gerard Hurd. Eventually, teams had enough success. It was like, okay, just do this. And the Cal game never got repeated. I think Casey Thompson's a lot more likely to repeat the success that he had in the bowl game than Gerard Hurd was. I'm just saying that there are still elements of this that make it really difficult, I think, to make a decision. I want to check in with our Alabama guys and find out from their perspective how close really was the Mac Jones-Bryce Young battle from a year ago. Because it is a little bit of a different situation that Bryce was a brand new arrival. And the expectation is that he'll be the starter this year and that he'll blow up and be the next guy in that Alabama chain of offensive playmakers. But Mac Jones is going to end up being a first-round draft pick. So, they were seeing something in practice. It was like, okay, well, this guy is playing at a high level. And at the end of the year, his talent will take him to the NFL. I wonder, I don't know that I know this completely, but I'll reach out to our Alabama guys and go, hey, at the end of the year or the end of August and spring, what would you say the split was? Did you ever feel like it was 50-50? Did it always feel like it was 70-30? Like, how close did Bryce Young ever truly make it to put Sarkisian and Saban in a position where they had to choose? I never got the sense that Mac Jones allowed for them to do that. I feel like right now, Casey Thompson is still doing that. Again, if there's a game tomorrow, he's the starter and he may never look back. If he performs well enough on the field, they won't look back. But again, right now, I think you and I are both comfortable in saying if this were a 100-meter race, neither guy's 2 steps ahead of the other.
There's no Usain Bolt in this race.
Or even close, right? Like, I don't feel like someone has their body in front of the other guy yet. And it leads me to kind of just shoulder shrug a little bit. Like, I don't know what I expected in the spring. I somewhat expected this, but I think deep down you hope that there's more intel, right? You hope that one of these guys starts getting talked about the way a David Bend is being talked about on defense. And that just hasn't consistently happened. If this were a world where Steve Sarkisian wasn't viewed as an offensive genius, and this was just Tom Herman's staff, I think we'd be a lot more concerned about the fact that there hasn't been more consistent quality buzz about either of these two guys. Because all things in general, I remember when Sam was a young player, oh my God, it was like all you could do was hear Sam buzz. I almost felt unfair to Shane. It was like, oh my God, he's an alpha.
So fast, yeah.
And in the end, Shane had a better year last year than Sam did. And it remains to be seen, like when both guys enter the pros, does one guy have a significant advantage over the other? When Sam was a true freshman, it was a push. I mean, both guys were just they were both below average. And then the thing that separated Sam was all these intangibles. But God, man, I can't. Intangibles are ruined for me forever, for now. Because all I heard for 4 years was Sam was Tom Herman's, like, the guy that Tom wished he could be. But in the end, that didn't get Texas very far. And in Sam Ehlinger's junior and senior year, it didn't really get him anywhere.
You did the best intangible I ever heard. I know we're going along, but the best intangible I ever heard, and I always bring it up, Shane Buechele winning in ping pong.
You do love the ping pong.
It's just the summer of ping pong, man. Like that was because they would talk about it. And like players did interviews and talked about it, and Charlie Strong talked about it. And so they made it seem like, man, this guy's competitive. We haven't seen a competitor like this. This guy kills it in ping pong. But I will say this in the intangible.
I'm sorry.
It's just I'm never going to let it go. But in the intangible conversation, though, Ketch, when the spring game is over on Saturday, and now when we start hearing Casey Thompson's doing all the organizing, your favorite 7-on-7s and summer workouts, Casey's the guy sending out the text messages. Casey's the guy that's getting everyone rallied. Casey's doing this, and everyone's posting their little videos online. Casey. But that gets back to the staff, and that's what they're seeing. And I think that starts giving him a little bit of momentum. So this is where I think Hudson Card, and it's tough, right? Because Casey's older. You don't want to step on toes. You can't organize your own workouts, right? I mean, that night when you have two factions, so you really have to. Okay, well, he's taking the lead on this. So what do I do here? I guess I've just got to show up.
Don't you think Hudson's deferring a little bit the way Casey would have, though? What would have happened last year if Casey was like, man, forget Sam. I'm going to organize some stuff.
Correct.
And it is something that Hudson's going to have to overcome. I think I don't, kind of like I said, in a world where Casey, probably in a world where just in the last week, I hadn't been hearing more positive things about Hudson than Casey, I'd probably be going like, man, if things stay like they are today, Casey's definitely the starter. It just feels like the actual competition is way more muddier than this other thing that we're talking about. And Hudson's going to have to overcome that. But it's so fresh in my brain as to how Sam was responsible for all of those things for the last 4 years. And it might have been that Casey Thompson was the player they should have been playing all along. But because of those things that we're talking about, and the fact that Sam was safe, and the fact that maybe Casey Casey hasn't yet turned into a plus practice player during his career ever. Not now, certainly not last year, in the years before. So it's a strange one. It is, in the sense that I feel like I've got memories of 5 different examples in my head, and they all conflict with one another. But this one sticks out in my head. You go back to, God, this is dated. So if there are any 18-year-olds who are in the chat right now or watching this video, I'm about to use an 18-year-old example. And people are like, stop using these archaic half a generation examples. But once upon a time, Chance Mock and Vince Young were in very similar positions in their battle. Vince was a redshirt freshman in 2003. Chance had been on campus since 2000. Chance was a guy that in 2003 threw, I think, 18 touchdowns. And he was the guy that was better in interviews, was organizing team activity. He was doing all these things that Casey is doing. But at some point they were like, we got to put this number 10 guy on the field. Even if he's not as ahead in all of these other things as Chance Mock was. Even if there were like growing pains that had to be, Texas in 2003 went into an OU game where their strategy seemed to be, we're just going to throw Vince in and see if he can YOLO his way to a win. And they were tied like 14-14, I think, at the end of two quarters or after the end of the quarter. They ended up losing that game by like 50 points. But after the end of the first quarter, it was like, oh my God, Vince Young. And then, there's just too many examples that I've seen over the years at this school that will go both ways. And that was Matt Norgren, by the way, Chase, that dribbled the ball to the end zone, not Chance Mock. He's thinking of the Baylor game in 2005. If you can imagine Texas, once upon a time, Anwar, Texas used to beat teams like 70-0. And the backup.
Tell me more about that, Papa.
and the backup quarterback would get in the game and do things like fumble the ball in the open field, and the ball bounced right back to him, and it just kept running. It was like, oh, number one teams in the country have all kinds of weird breaks that go their way. You ain't seen any of that. And it's been a long time.
Dude, I've seen shape appearance since I've been here. I don't know about this other shit you're talking about.
Hey, to be fair, you could have been here, though, since 2010, and the number would be the same.
Okay.
So,
I don't view myself as a jinx. Because
no, you're not.
I realized, because it was like this thing was south before I got here.
The Longhorn Network is the unofficial jinx in general. Like, if you're looking for a thing that people blame on jinxes, the Big 12, the Longhorn Network is the thing that gets blamed as the jinx.
Yes.
Thank God I am not blamed for that.
We can we just get sidebar for a second?
Sure.
At what point will the Longhorn Network just flip the switch and start airing these damn media availabilities so people will stop bitching about it?
Never.
Okay. All right.
The Longhorn Network stopped being an idea that really was being developed a long time ago. And what you have is, things, I hate to say it, but the Yak is a little bit of a good example, right? Where, you get enough time goes by and it just doesn't quite take off the way that you thought and planned it would be. And then it needs an injection of sorts before it can take off again. I think I've experienced that. I think the Longhorn Network's the same way. It needs an injection, but ESPN doesn't care, and UT isn't going to give back money at the expense of making the product better. And I think if Texas wanted to do a little bit of that and say, hey, what if we invest and we want to, but at this point, the checks matter more than the content does. And I don't think that's ever going to change. And ESPN is not looking at the Longhorn Network and thinking to themselves, hey, we've had a few emails from people who want to start watching the press conferences after practices live. We need to make that happen. Instead, I think there's a programmer somewhere who's like, do we have something programmed for when that runs? Yes. All right, we're good. We're good. I'm not wasting my time. I've got other things that matter more. And I think sadly, that's where the Longhorn Network is. It's on autopilot. And until that thing goes off of autopilot and someone dynamic comes in that Texas will have to bring in. ESPN's not going to guess who ESPN hired to take the Longhorn Network places that's never been before. Remember when the Longhorn Network started, it felt like every reporter that they hired was on the way up.
Mm-hmm,
right?
Mm-hmm.
It was like, oh man, they're graduating people to the mothership.
Yes.
It's been a while since that's happened.
Acho the last one?
Yeah. And I think that's an accident. It was a place where they were bringing in their young talent and using it as the minor leagues. Now they're just going for UT former players. And you can tell based on the fact that it's only that it's stagnated. And I don't think it'll ever get better. I think it is what it is. And as long as Texas is cashing checks, I don't think they care either.
Okay, it was a quick sidebar. It just is inevitable. We go back or start to wrap up. It's just inevitable whenever we start saying, live. Steve Sarkisian speaking live. We'll give you updates. It's just inevitable. Whereas is this on LHN? Is it on? And it just. I go to the point now when I start a thread. I just say I don't know if it's on LHN.
Hey, can I tell you my favorite part of today's broadcast?
Yes.
Trevor's like, I love Ketch's history lessons. Somehow I was able to remember this very minuscule event from 2005 involving the backup quarterback, but I couldn't remember that it was Colorado instead of Utah in the bowl game last year. So like, that's where my head is today. Like I'm remembering things from 2 decades ago. I can't remember 5 minutes ago, sadly.
That's how old brain works.
I know.
Yeah,
I am even old.
Yeah, even though I can't remember most people in my high school. So
I'm blaming it on COVID brain. I got that second shot. I'm waiting to see if I get Sucameld. For those that don't know, Sucameld got his second shot. About 48 hours into it, started bragging that the worst was over, and it hit him like a ton of bricks. I'm so sore today. I feel like I got beat up, and I'm like, is this the worst of it though, or is this the preview of like what tomorrow's going to be like? I don't know.
As long as it's if it's going to go down, you need it to happen today. You don't need it on Saturday.
Oh my God, I know, because I'm coming back to Austin on Saturday, so I need to not be on the road with like 103-degree temperature. Look, thank you for tuning in. Look, I didn't say it earlier. If you are in the chat right now, if you are watching right now, can you see how many people we have watching live right now, Anwar? I got the Be Live on, so I don't have that number.
It says 42 right now that have still hung around.
Click the subscribe button. Do us a favor. Hit the like button and help us grow this project that we're working on. We're going to do more of this. We're going to do more live shows like this. And today's the first time we've gone live on YouTube. We'll probably do it again tomorrow. Today was going to be the David Benda. Probably defensive side of the ball conversation. And then we found out at like 10 o'clock, they're giving us the quarterbacks. And then it was impossible not to do a live broadcast.
We did what LHN won't do, which is we scrapped our original programming.
Yes.
And went for the breaking news.
Sometimes it's as simple as that.
And by the way, and Saturday for sure we'll be back. For Saturday is like that after the spring game. No one does a post-game show that talks about the Texas Longhorns. We've been doing it for years. So make sure you join us Saturday afterwards. We'll go live.
Anwar's brainchild, by the way. He deserves all the credit for helping us get to a place where the post-game show, which I think everybody enjoys. I mean, we do those things at 2 a.m. sometimes. We're the only ones doing it live. We're the only ones committed to doing like multiple hours in the middle of the night. Come back to us on Saturday. We will be your salvation in terms of providing, and it won't just be quarterback conversation. The beautiful thing about Saturday is we'll be watching a lot of things that we haven't seen with our own eyes over the course of this month. We might go for like 6 hours. Like, who knows? Like, we've done crazier things. But for now, for myself and Anwar Richardson, thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe and that like button, and we'll do this again tomorrow. Later.